you crazy bitch!
In the year 2011, out of the hands of Studio Asteroid, we get Mirai Nikki. To date, still one of the most popular animes. You'll find it hard to encounter a fan of the genre that hasn't at least heard of the series. A shonen mystery story, Mirai Nikki introduces us to Amano Yukiteru, a 14-year-old boy who spends much of his day alone looking at the screen of his phone, writing a diary of the things he sees or encounters during the day. But this diary is changed by Deus Ex Machina, an actual god, along with other 11 users to take part in a survival game. The diaries now show them their future for up to 91 days. Although this time room is pretty useless considering that it also gives all of them the power to change it. The last one standing will become the god of time and space in Deus's place. Our protagonist will have to team up with Gasai Yuno, his stalker, to have a chance at surviving.
As we mentioned before, Mirai Nikki was extremely popular during the time of its release, and for many years to come. We are here to ask the question, how good was it actually? Does it still hold up? Let's find out.
One of the aspects of the series that surely helped its popularity are its visuals, showing adequate knowledge of camera angles and framing to convey emotion and information. This can be seen during the first episode, where for the most part Deus Ex is shown as if we're looking at him from below, to emphasize the overpowering aura he irradiates, further reinforced both with a bird's eye view and a side-by-side with Yukiteru, portraying how absolutely massive he is in comparison to every other character. We can also see some quite unique character design, with very recognizable silhouettes, especially in the likes of Murumuru, Yomotsu and Yuno. Though the lively and colorful nature of these can take away from the tone of the story. These factors contributed to its wide popularity during the fall 2011 season, although it doesn't reach the same level as some of its contemporaries. This fact can be further explored if we talk about the many moments where we see noticeable dips in the work of the art department, with the CGI being an aspect that has aged very badly over the years. The worst offender being Deus Ex Machina, which is made more jarring when we compare him with his manga appearance. The fight scenes that become more common during the later parts of the series are also lacking in fluidity and impact sometimes, showing the lack of experience of the studio in this aspect. Check this out. Although the bloodbath scenes deserve a positive mention. Moving on to the narrative side of the series, we reach an interesting point of discussion, as it is one of, if not the most important aspect in a thriller story. In terms of world building and character development, Mirai Nikki constantly takes one step forward and two steps back, making progress in some aspects of the story only to throw them out moments later, most often seen with the constant back and forth of Yuno and Yukiteru's relationship. At the start of the series, the rules for the game were well established. If your diary gets destroyed, you die, becoming some sort of whirlwind for some reason. Then, why the fuck did Styx die with such minor damage to her scroll? It's believable that Thor died since his bone got completely wrecked. But just getting a scroll pierced by a small object shouldn't equate to it being destroyed. If this is the case, then why doesn't Yuki die whenever he drops his phone or if the screen gets scratched? Minor damages like these don't make the item non-functional, so they shouldn't count as death flags. In the character development department, while we see the secondary casts change all throughout the series, evolving with the events that happen, our main characters are in a constant back and forth between growth and regression. And while the story picks up a good pace early on, generating tension and mystery, there are certain plot points that make the rhythm slow down significantly. Although the series doesn't reach a point that could be considered truly boring, it is a noticeable drop in the narrative quality, such as the kidnapping halfway through the series, more on that later, or the lead up to the sex scene during the final arc, which just felt like 10 minutes of filler at this point of the story. We can see that there was an initial effort to establish a grounded world with a wide cast of characters, but certain decisions made down the line botch much of the potential that the series concept held. It makes one wonder what could have happened. Perhaps the source material was lacking in depth and storytelling from the beginning, or maybe a lack of direction or foresight, considering the rather drastic shift in tone near the end of the series. Though this will be explained better later on.
Yuno Gasai might be one of the most recognizable characters in any anime, as I am sure that most people have seen her online even if they have not watched the show at all. She is usually deemed as the textbook definition of a yandere character, which basically means a sweet and cute psychotic stalker who wants the attention of her beloved one. Putting aside the fact that only an anime fan would like to have a yandere for his own, considering that stalking is a crime by itself, Yuno Gasai is one of the banes and boons of Mirai Nikki. She herself hooked lots of people into the story, which is a commendable feat by itself, and she has a very defined mindset which is recognizable, consistent and popular within the fandom, which explains her status as one of the most significant yanderes in the industry. That being said, Yuno herself fucks the story most of the time.
I come to make an announcement.
Gasai
It's
Yuno.
a bitch ass motherfucker.
Although her actions greatly affect the plotline and other characters, she herself does not grow in any capacity, only showing sub-development at the very end of the show. Yuno is very defined and properly characterized. Yeah, that's true. But the character itself begins and ends there. A crazy girl who stalks Yukiteru, but also has a caring and sweet side.
Crazy bitch.
The biggest victim of this is, ironically, Yukiteru, our protagonist, who usually takes one step forward and two steps back as a character. The best example of this happens at the middle of the season, so yeah. After a succession of events that we won't spoil, Yukiteru and Yuno began to get closer to each other despite the rough start that they had. Yukiteru wanted to see the stars with Yuno, so they traveled to the mountains. Despite the hardships that they overcame together, and all the bonding that they had made until this point, even taking a picture as a groom and bride, Yuno for some reason decided to abduct Yukiteru by adding some drugs into his soda. What? Even though the relationship was going well, to the point that Yukiteru was actually falling in love with her, only now, just now, she decides to pull this crappy stunt. This moment made all previous bonding scenes kind of pointless, as all the build-up of the relationship was thrown away for the sake of the script. Otherwise, we would have no conflict during this part. You can say that Akise's investigation triggered this decision, but she modified her own memories so she didn't go apeshit when Akise was on her house. And even then, when Akise sent a message to Yukiteru stating that he should stay away from Yuno, we can assume that Yukiteru's loyalty will be inclined towards Yuno considering all the crap that they faced together. Keep in mind that Yukiteru still trusts her, despite finding those bodies during the first episodes of the show. Anyways, once Yukiteru escapes from her, he grows some serious resentment towards her. Just to forget everything in like one episode.
Oh no! Anyway, last week...
Yuno's behavior also has the side effect of making the show less interesting when she's on screen, as we all know her intellect and incredible fighting skills, aka she kills everything in sight.
Destroy!
While it is entertaining to see her decimate enemies and perform strategies to outplay dire users, she still is the same yandere that we saw at the beginning of the show. Compare that to side characters like Yuri Minene, who grows considerably throughout the show, starting as a merciless terrorist and ending up as some sort of big sister to the main character. At least we can say that Yuno's action moved the story just enough so other characters can shine and have moments to develop themselves, like Akise.
Funnily enough, if you lower your expectations regarding Yuno's development, you'll save yourself several headaches and probably enjoy the show a bit more, as a lot of her actions are simply explained by her deep obsession with Yukiteru. Maybe we were wrong by expecting a serious character development from a psychotic cute waifu, but if we only consider this specific character trait, she does a good job at stalking the protagonist and putting serious pressure on their enemies. Basically, if you like a pink-haired girl with an axe killing people, I won't judge ya. Although we don't want to spoil the anime's finale, we still wanted to share some thoughts, so we will explain to the best of our abilities without relying on spoilers. As it was stated several times, the anime was fun and entertaining for us. At no point were we bored during the show, but the final episodes were surprising to say the least. There was a noticeable change in tone, and although it was pretty fun to watch, everything until that point was pretty grounded and believable. Once you accept the usage of future diaries in the story, everything behaves in sensical ways. Yeah, Yuno can kill several people and deflect several blades with her own knife, but come on, it's an anime after all. In order to survive, most of the diary users formed alliances, took advantage of their diaries, and strategized according to their own weaknesses and strengths. When fighting, the characters used several weapons like firearms, knives, explosives, or their physical strength to overpower their opponents, leading to interesting scenarios and fights. Although supernatural powers were present, being the Future Diaries one of them, the participants of the survival game only had access to that specific magical tool. Powerful supernatural capabilities were present in the show, but were limited only to Deus Ex Machina and Murmur, characters who are not directly involved in the survival game, meaning that the remaining members of the cast had to rely on their diary and their own abilities and tools to win. That is, until the final arc of the show. With everything that we said, you probably have an idea of what to expect, but let's make a brief comparison. Most of Mirai Nikki behaves like Metal Gear Solid. There are some weird situations or characters, but for the most part both products are more or less plausible. The final arc of the show is Metal Gear Revengeance, going full Super Saiyan with crazy fights and over-the-top action. I can only speak for myself, but I would prefer that the final episode of the show relied on the already established logic, rather than changing it completely during the final minutes of the show. It is entertaining and serviceable, but the sudden change was simply jarring and confusing until I accepted the new direction of the show.
In this section of the video, we will evaluate the aspects that we consider most important in the anime, using a grading system from 1 to 5, where 1 is a piece of crap and 5 is outstanding. You get the idea. Production value, where we talk about the animation, soundtrack and everything related to those areas. Then storytelling, where we discuss the story, plot and rhythm. The characters will have their own dedicated section, where we talk about their development and relevance in the anime. Finally, we have the enjoyment, where we basically say whether we like the anime or not. So, what is our assessment for Mirai Nikki? Well, starting with production value. We consider that the anime had colorful visuals and distinctive character design, not super generic, at least compared to other shonen animes, starting from the fact that they changed their clothes. However, the choppy animation, subpar fighting scenes and CGI that age like milk with beer subtract a few points in the animation department. However, this soundtrack had very recognizable tracks, with some of them being memorable, all things considered. The soundtrack also featured a huge variety of styles, ranging from chaotic and frantic to literal stock music. Yeah, it's a mixed bag, with most of them being good tracks and the variety making the music department competent and fresh. The voices were good overall, although Yukiteru can be annoying sometimes. Moving on to storytelling. The premise is interesting enough, and the first episodes were very competent, but the quality after those wasn't good enough. Most of the interesting plotlines are developed by side characters rather than Yukiteru and Yuno, with them being mostly a hit or miss during the show. The pacing of the anime takes a heavy dip halfway through, being mostly entertaining for the action scenes and again the side characters. Now about the characters. Similar to what we just talked about, side characters end up being the star of the show. Yes, June was iconic as a yandere, and her feats are memorable after watching the show, but she herself didn't grow, and she was very simple aside from her background. And she was only developed at the very end. She lives and dies by her stereotype. Yukiteru sometimes shows progress as a character, but often he goes back to his old self, making him very inconsistent in both personality and thought process. However, these sidecasts show constant development and interaction with each other, being Veneno the best example in this department. Finally, did we enjoy this show? And honestly, yes we did. Despite not being very solid in certain technical narrative aspects, the show was never really boring. At some points it was a bit slow, and a few scenes raised some eyebrows, but it wasn't a deal breaker. If you watch the anime casually, it can be an entertaining experience. The anime isn't very long, and it has lots of action, mystery, and some comedy in between. However, if you are more aware of the flaws and watch the anime more critically, sometimes you might feel a bit off by some scenes.
Mirai Nikki is an anime that appeals to us due to its premise, but it is a bit of a letdown when looking at it critically. While sporting a decent soundtrack, its visuals pale in comparison to the other heavy hitters of the season, which makes a dent on its production value. The storytelling is sloppy at times, with conflict that feels forced, and a change in tones that feels like having fireworks on a funeral. Although there are many interesting characters in the secondary cast, their screen time is cut short for the much less interesting main characters, both of which experience far less growth. That being said, and although it may sound completely opposite to all we just talked about, Mirai Nikki is a pretty fun series. There wasn't a point in the series where we were truly bored. There's always something happening on screen, and the interaction with the secondary cast are genuinely entertaining. It is a series we would no doubt recommend, especially to a more lighthearted viewer.